If you spend enough time scrolling, you'll notice that everyone seems to have survived a narcissist parent, a narcissist boss, and in our case, a narcissist partner. It has become the story of our generation, and yet something doesn't sit right. Just because a relationship was hard or dysfunctional, that doesn't mean it was a narcissistic one. Shock, horror, I know, but sometimes people are just human. Flawed, unskilled, and unaware. So today, we're shutting down the noise and diving into what narcissism actually is. I'm Sam, and this is A Connection. We live in a society that sociologist Zygmunt Bauman called a liquid modern world. Relationships are fluid, unstable, and they're prone to collapsing. And in this chaotic world, people have a tendency to reach for language that helps them explain the pain, even if the words don't quite fit. When we couple this with the introduction of psychological terms entering our vocabulary, it's easy to understand how the word narcissist has become the catch-all word for someone who didn't love you the way that you wanted, someone who couldn't meet your emotional needs, and even somebody who just didn't have the tools to show up for your relationship. But honestly, we didn't get here by accident. Most of us are trying to make sense of our relationships in a world that loves certainty and despises nuance. Algorithms love extremes. The bigger the fear, the hotter the tea, the longer we stay. So suddenly, a woman who cancels dinner twice because she's overwhelmed, she isn't just emotionally unavailable, she's a master manipulator, a red flag in a red dress, and a walking personality disorder. And just like that, we end up pathologizing normal relationship conflict, turning every misunderstanding into a mental health label. So the real challenge is, how do we tell the difference between somebody who is just struggling and someone who shows genuine patterns of narcissistic behavior? Well, let's ask the most basic question of all. Well, I'm glad you asked, even though you didn't. The term narcissist is derived from the Greek myth of Narcissus, a man who rejects the advances of all men and women and ends up falling in love with his own reflection in a pool of water. Narcissus becomes so enamored with himself that he gazed upon his own reflection until his body wasted away and eventually grew back on the riverbank as a narcissus flower. However, narcissism as a personality disorder is found and described in the ICD-10 and the DSM-5 as a constant pervasive pattern of grandiosity, a deep need for admiration, and a lack of empathy. Or more simply put, someone who feels insecure deep down but on the surface presents as overly confident and superior. And you won't believe this, guys, but narcissism is actually quite rare. Some studies show that this affects roughly 1 to 5% of the population, depending on what's being measured. And it is most common in men and younger adults. Not 50%, not every ex, and not everyone born after 1990. 1 to 5%. But like most things today, people are using a black and white paintbrush to talk about something that has a lot of different hues. Researcher Elsa Runningstam highlights that just labeling somebody a narcissist leaves out a lot of depth. Elsa draws our attention to the fact that slapping the label of narcissist leaves out a lot of detail because it isn't one thing. Yes, you have grandiose narcissism. That's the classic braggadocious, self-inflated type. But there's also vulnerable narcissism as well. This is a silent, fragile, and hypersensitive form of narcissism. And because it doesn't look like the stereotype, people can miss it completely. And so when you realize narcissism can wear more than one mask, it becomes a lot clearer why so many people feel confused about what they're actually dealing with. Because while many people diagnose narcissistic personality disorder as some proud, overconfident, and out of control person, those who genuinely have NPD tend to have a deeply unstable sense of self, an intense fear of shame, and a desperate need to be admired, and find it almost impossible to handle criticism. But knowing this is where we can trip up, because having narcissistic traits doesn't mean someone has NPD. Wanting validation or people to subscribe to your YouTube channel, go ahead. That's human. Being self-centered during instances of high stress is also very human. And caring about how you're perceived in the world, again, welcome to humanity. Traits only become personality disorders when they are rigid, long-standing, cause significant impairment, and repeatedly disrupt relationships. We're being conditioned to call people who have poor emotional intelligence, unhealed trauma, and bad dating habits narcissists because it's easier for us to come to terms with. But that doesn't mean that we're right. So I've harped on about all the ways people are not narcissists, so let's talk about some of the markers that experts commonly note when a person is displaying genuine narcissistic patterns. First up, they idealize, devalue, and discard. This is also what people online call love bombing. In the beginning of a relationship, they shower you with attention and with praise. They make you feel seen, chosen, and special. However, once things are a little more serious, you begin to notice that they are critical of you. They often invalidate your feelings and they deliberately withdraw affection as a form of punishment. Finally, when they're bored, threatened, or no longer receiving praise, they just pull away entirely. Now, we all have moments where we're selfish, inconsiderate. It's just an unfortunate side effect of who we are. However, narcissistic behavior isn't about occasional selfishness. It's a pattern, a repeated inability or unwillingness to recognize that feelings can be stepped on. With a narcissist, your emotions are nothing more than background noise. Your happiness means nothing unless it's beneficial to them. Your pain isn't something that needs their attention. It's just an annoying inconvenience that's interfering with their lives and their perceived greatness. We can end up throwing the word narcissist around to describe someone rude or inconsistent, but genuine narcissistic traits are deeper, structural even. They show up in how someone processes relationships at a fundamental level, and this can manifest in an ability to rewrite history, which brings me on to my next point. You tell them they agreed to come to a work dinner. They say they didn't. They did. You remember it clearly, but they're so confident that eventually you start to question your own memory. Maybe I misunderstood, or maybe I've got it confused with another event, but you didn't. What's happening is deliberate. It's a subtle reshaping of reality designed to make you doubt your own internal compass until you become entirely reliant on theirs. And when somebody can talk you out of something you've literally lived through, the relationship stops being about connection and starts being about control. Now, most of us don't like criticism and we can get defensive and deflect. But with narcissistic behavior, the reaction is different because every criticism is a threat to who they believe themselves to be. Psychologists call this narcissistic injury, a tiny crack in their self-image that's perceived as a strike from a heat-seeking missile. This is because people who have NPD have no internal sense of self-esteem. It all comes from external validation, which means any criticism, even gentle feedback, can feel like a full-blown assault on their personality. And this manifests in 4 classic responses: rage, withdrawal, punishment, and humiliation. So where emotionally healthy people can integrate feedback, even when it stings, narcissistic personalities collapse under the weight of it. So I named this video, Are You a Narcissist? Assuming it's still called that. So let's turn the mirror, shall we? Part of why this topic hits so close to home is because many of us carry little flecks of narcissistic behavior, especially when life feels overwhelming or we're trying to protect ourselves. The psychologist Theodore Millon points out that narcissism isn't an on-off switch. It's a spectrum. On one end, you have healthy confidence, the ability to back yourself. In the middle, you have those moments where stress makes you a bit more self-centered than we'd like to admit. And then on the far end sits the full disorder. So before we rush to judge others, it's worth understanding where we land in these moments too. In a world that rewards self-promotion, hyper-individualism, and main character energy, it's easy to drift into habits that look narcissistic, even if we don't meet the disorder. And if you can bear that in mind for yourself, you're more likely to extend a little grace to your partners as well. So now you know some of the things to look for. How can you look after yourself out there in the wild jungle of relationships? Pay attention to patterns and not moments. Anyone can have a selfish moment, a bad day, a stressed out reaction that they're not proud of. That's not narcissism. What you're looking for is the rhythm of the relationship. The behavior that doesn't just show up once in an argument, but a theme that threads each week together. One of the clearest windows into somebody's emotional worlds is what happens the first time you say no. Healthy people might take a moment, but after all, boundaries require us to adjust. But with someone with strong narcissistic traits, the reaction is different. Your boundary doesn't feel like a request, it feels like a threat. And instead of adjusting, they might withdraw, guilt trip, or find subtle ways to make you pay for having the audacity to set some damn boundaries. Don't feed the grandiosity. Admiration is a beautiful part of any relationship. We all like to feel seen. We all like to feel appreciated. But with someone who has NPD, there's a fine line between healthy affirmation and accidentally stepping into the role of an emotional hype man or woman. Because grandiosity is starving. It doesn't want to be appreciated. It wants to be fed endlessly. And the moment you stop pouring into that inflated sense of self, you feel the coldness. Every relationship thrives when both partners show gratitude and admiration. You could check out my video on how couples can show gratitude for more info. But when a person demands worship, you're no longer in a place where mutual respect is possible. Narcissists thrive in spaces where we feel unsure of ourselves. When your self-worth is shaky, anyone with a strong personality can change your reality. But when your sense of self is solid, you don't fold when they disapprove. Self-esteem will give you gravitational centering that manipulation can find hard to move. So inside and outside of your relationships, work on your self-esteem. Calling someone a narcissist can feel empowering. It gives some context to what you have experienced, and it lays out a language for what you might be feeling. But when we rely on labels alone, we risk missing something important, that most people are not narcissists. Some are emotionally immature, some are avoidant, and some are simply people we weren't meant to have long-term relationships with. And yes, there are a small group of people who genuinely have NPD. They're often carrying their own unresolved wounds, trying to bridge the gap between their own fragile inner world and the conceited way in which they present themselves. And look, the point of this video hasn't been to create shields for narcissists. It's been to try and provide some clarity to help you see yourself more honestly and to help you choose healthier relationships. Because after all, an accurate diagnosis means there's a greater chance of an accurate cure. So drink your medicine, and if you've made it to the end of this video, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell for weekly videos on building stronger relationships. It's free, and it means you might see a whole lot more of me. I'm Sam, and until the next time, make some moves.